Some aches don't cry out. They hum quietly in the background, like an old kettle warming again and again, never quite boiling, never quite cooling. The body doesn't scream when it's tired of inflammation. It slows, it puffs around the knees, it forgets what deep rest feels like. And still, we call it just aging. But sometimes healing whispers back, and sometimes that whisper is golden. There's a quiet medicine found in kitchens older than us, not bottled, not branded, not sold in glossy boxes, just remembered. In Japan, the elders don't always explain why they do things. They stir slowly, they sip slowly, they prepare their days like prayers, repeated, not rushed. And somewhere in that rhythm, a blend of honey and turmeric has passed through generations. Not as a miracle, but as a kindness. Not because they feared illness, but because they remembered what care feels like. One, the inflammation we ignored, and the golden hush within turmeric. There was a time Hiroshi could sit in the garden for hours, pulling weeds, patting soil, humming songs he never remembered learning. The ground was never too hard, his knees were never too loud. But then, the slow refusal began. Not pain exactly, just a quiet disobedience, a kind of stiffness that spoke without voice. He bought creams, raised his legs with cushions, stopped kneeling altogether. It's just age, he told himself. But somewhere inside, he wondered if the body had grown tired of being ignored. One evening, as the sun leaned low over his porch, his neighbor brought a thermos, warm in the hand, fragrant, earthy, gingery, slightly sweet. "Try this," she said. "No promises, just warmth." Inside, turmeric, ginger root, pepper, bone broth. A combination her grandmother swore by, not as a cure, but as a comfort. Hiroshi sipped slowly. Didn't expect relief. Just wanted to honor the gesture. But that night, when he stood to brush his teeth, his knees didn't plead. They cooperated, gently, like old friends reunited after silence. The next night, he brewed the blend himself, measured nothing, stirred slowly, watched the steam curl into the dusk. There's a compound in turmeric, curcumin, known to hush inflammation deep in the joints. But Hiroshi didn't need the word. He felt it. Not a fix, not a miracle, but a loosening. His doctor, months later, noticed his gait. Less guarded, she said. He didn't mention the golden drink. He didn't have to. Some rituals are private medicine. Now, every dusk, he brews again. Lets the scent rise, kneels beside his tomatoes, and offers the earth his weight, without fear that it won't be returned. Because the body, when listened to, sometimes listens back. 2. The breath behind the sweetness, honey as elder's shield. Naoko used to hum while boiling water. Just a little tune, a bridge between dreams and daylight. But then the mornings grew heavier, not loud, just labored. A quiet tension in her chest, like someone had folded a damp cloth inside her lungs. She wasn't sick, but she wasn't well either. Breathing became something she noticed, not something she trusted. She stopped humming, stopped reaching for high shelves, stopped greeting the kettle with song. It's just part of getting older, they told her. So she tried to agree. Until one day, while reorganizing a forgotten cupboard, her hand brushed against an old jar, honey, thick and ambered by time. It made her think of her mother, of childhood cold soothed not by medicine, but by a quiet spoon and a voice that said, "Let it stay on the tongue." That's where the healing begins. She opened the lid. The scent was floral, familiar. She didn't measure, just dipped the spoon, held it to her lips, let it melt. Not for sweetness, but for memory. She didn't expect anything. But that morning, her breath came easier. Not deep, not effortless, but unstuck. And later, while steeping tea, she hummed. Just once. There's science now. Honey's enzymes, antioxidants. its calming effect on the vagus nerve. But Naoko didn't know any of that. She only knew the fog had lifted a little, and the air didn't feel like work. She made it a ritual, each dawn before speaking. Spoon, pause, melt. A way to greet the day with gentleness. Sometimes she still wakes with tightness, but now she meets it with warmth, not resistance. The honey doesn't fix her, but it reminds her. Softness still works, and some songs, even the quiet ones, know how to return when the air makes room again. 3. When together becomes healing. The golden blend ritual. After his wife passed, Tetsuya didn't stop speaking. He just stopped being heard. The house wasn't loud before, but now even the clock ticked like an echo. His mornings felt like unopened letters, full of words that had nowhere to go. One day, while washing a cracked teacup she once used, he noticed the small jar by the window, turmeric, still sealed, and beside it, a spoon she'd favored, slightly bent. Honey in the cabinet. He remembered her voice, once soft over the stove. It only works if you stir slow. So he did. He didn't know why, just followed the muscle memory of her. He boiled the water, added the turmeric, watched the yellow unfold like an old photograph warming in the sun. Added honey, stirred. The swirl was almost beautiful, a golden ribbon unspooling into silence. He didn't expect it to help. He just wanted to hear something. But after a few mornings, the swelling in his knuckles lessened. The morning fog in his head began to thin. His walk from kitchen to garden no longer needed the cane. Science would later call it synergy, how turmeric's curcumin and honey's polyphenols ease oxidative stress, balance gut flora, even soothe the nervous system that grief had frayed. But Tetsuya never read that. He only knew that each time he stirred the blend, something stirred back in him. It became less about the ingredients, more about the gesture, more about the ritual of remembering, not her exactly, but the version of himself who still belonged to mornings. Now, he drinks from the cracked teacup, still warm from his hands, and when the light hits the window, he says quietly, "Still here? Not to anyone, but because the body listens, and so does love." 4. The 7-day hush. Noticing what softens Emiko never counted calories, or steps, or the ounces in her glass. What she counted was mornings. How many began without that silent wince in her hips, the kind she never told her children about. For years, she thought healing would feel like music, a dramatic return, a spotlight of relief. But real healing, she discovered, arrives like fog retreating. You don't see it leave, you just notice space again. It started quietly, a cup of golden milk before bed. Not for a reason, just a whisper she followed, a ritual with no goal. Day 1, she slept heavier. Day 3, she rose without bracing her hand on the nightstand. Day 5, she climbed the stairs without pausing midway. She didn't tell anyone, didn't want to break the spell. Each night, she warmed the blend in the smallest pot, blanket around her shoulders, the cup warming both hands. She stirred with the back of a spoon, always clockwise, always once more than needed. She began to listen again, to the sound of her own swallowing, to the hush between sips. The body doesn't always need solutions. Sometimes it just needs acknowledgement. And turmeric, with its quiet inflammation-easing curcumin, paired with honey's soft immune support, offered no miracle, just mercy. Emiko noticed fewer dreams filled with running, more with walking, along beaches from her childhood, where she never felt rushed. One evening, as she sipped, her cat curled beside her without startling her heart. That's when she knew something had changed. Not everything, just enough. She never called it healing. She called it remembering how to feel safe in her own body. And that was enough. 5. When healing becomes a sacred ordinary yui. no longer hurries the morning. She wakes not to an alarm, but to the light bending softly on her kitchen tiles. There's a jar, honeyed gold and turmeric rich, that waits on the windowsill. She doesn't call it a remedy. She calls it her beginning. Before she speaks, before she checks the weather or the aches, she wraps her hands around the glass, feels the cool rim warming with her skin. She never stirs the same way twice. Some days, the spoon moves like breath. Other days, like memory, pausing, circling, returning. She doesn't sip for health. She sips for relationship. With her knees that no longer ache every time she bends. With her gut that no longer clenches under stress. With her mornings, which now feel less like obligation and more like invitation. There's no performance here. No measuring, no tracking, just listening. Science might call it regulating cortisol, or gut-brain connection, or anti-inflammatory lifestyle. But Yui calls it something else entirely. A conversation I don't want to end. She told a friend once, not with pride, but with softness. I'm not doing this to live longer. I'm doing it so that when I do live, I'm present for it. The steam from her cup rises like a small offering each morning, to slowness, to choice, to the version of herself that still believes in gentleness without a goal. When she drinks, she doesn't hope for transformation. She honors continuity, and that's the healing we rarely talk about. The kind that doesn't fix you, but returns you to yourself, gently, golden, one sip at a time. It wasn't the pain that cut deepest. It was the years we carried it without curiosity, the mornings we pressed through, the small winces we dismissed with a breath and a shrug. We didn't ignore the body because we didn't care. We ignored it because we thought we were supposed to be strong, to endure, to prove we could keep going no matter how quietly we ached. No one told us that numbness was its own kind of injury, that silencing the discomfort also silenced the call for kindness. And now, when the joints speak more than they used to, when the hands hesitate before twisting the lid, we don't just mourn the agility that left. We mourn the time we weren't gentle when it was still with us. Not all grief wears the face of loss. Some grief is shaped like a question we never paused to ask. What would have changed if I had listened sooner? There is no shame in waiting this long, only a quiet ache for the tenderness we withheld. But even now, the body is not angry, it is waiting, still willing to soften if we offer it presence. Not apology. It wasn't rebellion, it was a soft signal we kept brushing aside. A knee that tightened not in protest, but in plea. A breath that shortened not in weakness, but in longing, for attention, not intervention. We mistook silence for strength, stillness for surrender. But the body was never giving up. It was waiting, in every joint that clicked, in every sigh after standing, in every forgotten hunger that whispered beneath the noise. It was speaking, and we were busy surviving. But now, in the hush of early morning, with a cup warmed by our own hands, with spices that carry memory deeper than language, we begin again. Not to fix, not to reverse, just to answer, to say, I hear you now. And somehow, in that reply, the ache grows quieter, the breath grows fuller, and the self we abandoned so long ago steps softly back into the room. Not as a stranger, but as someone we forgot how to love. You don't need to wait until something breaks to begin offering yourself gentleness. You don't need to earn stillness by first surviving the storm. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives with steam rising from a cup, with silence that doesn't need to be filled, with the way your hand slows, just because it can. Not all rituals are ancient. Some are born quietly on mornings when you decide not to rush the spoon. There is no ceremony, no proof, only the small act of choosing warmth instead of urgency. And in that act, you remember, your body was never asking for perfection, only participation, only presence. The golden swirl in the cup doesn't promise youth. It promises nothing, but it offers something. A moment where you are not late, not behind, not broken, just here, fully, again. So, if tomorrow comes and your hand reaches for the jar again, know that it's not just habit, it's homecoming. We'll be here too, not ahead of you, not behind, just beside you, as always. With breath, with warmth, with care. This wasn't a lesson, it was a remembering of how quietly the body has been trying to love you while you were busy surviving. You weren't careless, you were just carrying too much to notice the spoon, asking to be stirred slowly. And now, with this breath, with this warmth cupped gently in your palms, you don't owe an apology, you offer an arrival. You didn't fail your body, you just didn't know slowness was a language too. There's a sadness in that, but not shame. Only the kind of sorrow that makes space for a softer kind of beginning. And this time, you're not alone in the kitchen. The ritual remembers you now, and it's still warm.